Now.
On 105.9 FM and streaming worldwide on the WMAL app.
O'Connor and Company.
7:06, you're listening to O'Connor and Company, America's morning show. Thanks for tuning in here every single day and keeping us excited about what we do for you. Coming up at 7:35, Representative Andy Harris of Maryland. 8:05, Ron Vitiello running for U.S. Senate in Virginia. And then at 8:35, Byron York, Washington Examiner. I'm Larry O'Connor alongside Julie Gunlock.
Good morning.
Good morning to you, Julie. Do we have an affirmative? Yes, we do have Mark. Absolutely. Mark Chenoweth, who is the President and Chief Legal Officer for the new Civil Liberties Alliance, joins us right now. Mark, good morning. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning, Larry. Good to be with you guys.
So it's Garland v. Cargill, and this is the case before the Supreme Court that finally takes up this issue that, by the way, sadly crosses party lines because I believe it was President Donald Trump who first came up with this so-called bump stock ban, and he did it through the directly through the executive branch without any legislation. Is that right?
That's exactly right, and that's why the new Civil Liberties Alliance is concerned about this. It's really the job of Congress to decide whether or not particular things are legal or not legal, and if we allow agencies to write criminal law instead, then we're all going to be far worse off from a liberty perspective.
So my understanding of the argument in favor of this ban on bump stocks is, listen, there's a federal statute, as you just said, Congress did pass it, a president did sign it, that banned the ownership, in most cases, of machine guns. And
That's
a
right.
bump stock basically turns a rifle or firearm into a machine gun. That's their rationale?
That's their rationale, and I think if Congress had written a statute that defined a machine gun based on how quickly you can fire a weapon, then they might have a point. But that's not what Congress did. Congress said we're going to make a distinction between semi-automatic weapons and automatic weapons based on whether or not the trigger resets. And with a bump stock, with a semi-automatic weapon, even when there's a bump stock on it, you still only get one bullet for every pull of the trigger. It's just that you're able to activate that trigger more quickly.
And, of course, there's nothing stopping Congress from passing a law that is a little more specific, a little more refined. And then, of course, it's possible that would have to pass constitutional muster as well, which is the way we like it. But why hasn't Congress done that? And because they haven't, is this going to come down to the Supreme Court trying to figure out what the intent of the legislators had been when they passed the ban on machine guns?
Well, I don't think it'll come down to intent. They're going to look at some particular statutory terms that your listeners probably don't want to get into the nitty gritty.
Oh, you'd be surprised. They go pretty deep on this stuff. Go ahead.
They do. But yeah, they'll look at the language from the ban and try to figure out when Congress wrote automatically, did that cover this kind of device? But your point, Larry, is absolutely right. There were bills pending in Congress at the time that this rule went into effect, and Congress. Those bills essentially went away once ATF acted, but Congress had looked at this bump stock question before, and there were never the votes there to pass a bump stock ban. That might not be true today. There would be the votes today, but we don't know that, and we can't have federal agencies supplanting the Democratic votes of Congress.
We're speaking with Mark Chenoweth, who's the President and Chief Legal Officer for the new Civil Liberties Alliance, and he's part of this Cargill v. Garland case that the Supreme Court is hearing with regard to the bump stock ban. Here's the other thing that I think, rather relevant here, and I'm guessing that you're making the case as well. A machine gun is a machine gun, and it does what a machine gun does. A bump stock, although you could argue serves a purpose in terms of allowing somebody to fire a gun more rapidly, similar to a machine gun. A bump stock also serves another purpose, so that's not its sole purpose. I have spoken to amputees and disabled veterans who come back from serving our country overseas and at war, and of course they still want to continue firing guns, and bump stocks assist them in that. This is frankly an accessibility issue that could fall under the Americans with Disabilities Act.
It is, and even obviously our honored vets are one group, but even older shooters who have arthritic fingers, for example, find it very difficult sometimes to pull the trigger on a weapon, and this is a device that allows them to just hold their finger steady and use their offhand to activate, to essentially push the trigger into their finger rather than pulling the trigger.
So you want to read the tea leaves? Tell me how you think these arguments are going to go based on the makeup. I know it's tough these days because there's a few wild cards sitting up there in their black robes.
It can be, but we won this case 13-3 at the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals when it went en banc on a bipartisan basis, and I think that the makeup of the Supreme Court is such that we should be able to get a majority there as well. If you can get 13 out of 16 on the Fifth Circuit, I think you can get 5 out of 9 on the Supreme Court. I think the statute's pretty clear, and that the ATF, frankly, did a little bit too much in the way of gymnastics to try to get this result, and I think the court will see through that.
There's also a lesson here, I think, for any leader, and certainly for President. You're supposed to just look at these things, through very clear lenses and with a cold heart and just discern it. But I actually do take lawmakers' intentions into account here. When the left immediately knee-jerk starts banning stuff that is completely unrelated to a crime like that, we saw the shooting at the Kansas City Chiefs parade, which was clearly a handgun. Yeah. We knew it from the beginning, and suddenly they're calling on bans of AR-15s, and right? Yeah. You know what the intention there is. When President Trump saw the mass shooting that took place in Las Vegas, which we still don't have. I mean, there's so much mystery about that shooting, and saw that a bump stock was related. And I do think President Trump's heart was in there. He was misguided. He was wrong. He should have had advisors that said, "No, Mr. President, don't do this." But I think his heart was in the right place, and he said, "Listen, if we can stop something like this from happening, let's get rid of the bump stocks." But it is a lesson here, isn't it, Mark, that you don't make policies and determine the rights of individuals to protect themselves because your heart is in the right place, because you're reacting to a news item that might make you feel a certain way. Yeah.
You don't, and you don't do it at the agency level, because when you do, you're stuck with the penalties that Congress came up with for banning an actual machine gun, which is a 10-year prison sentence. Oh. And none of the bills in Congress that were looking to ban bump stocks would have attached a 10-year prison sentence to it. And so you end up with this kind of agency overkill because they're trying to put a square peg in a round hole.
Are there any, Larry mentioned this earlier about an accessibility issue and those who are disabled who still want to hunt or use firearms. Have any of these groups come forward? Are they supporting, have they done a amicus brief talking about how this would really further limit disabled people from having access to these firearms?
I don't believe there is an amicus brief from the disabled shooter community, but that's not too surprising because I don't think that community files a lot of amicus briefs. So they're just not organized to be ready to do that kind of thing necessarily.
One final question here, if you don't mind, Mr. Chenoweth, and it may seem like an incidental data point, but I think it might be relevant. Other than this Las Vegas shooting, which was horrible, is there some kind of ubiquity of major mass shootings and crimes that take place utilizing bump stocks? This was the first and last time I had ever heard of this device used in this way.
They may have been used in one other event, but they're not ubiquitous. They're not the choice of folks to do it. Frankly, they're kind of hard to use, and so a lot of these shootings are done by amateurs. Kids grabbing a gun from their parents' gun cabinet, what have you. And this is a difficult thing for someone who hasn't practiced to use. Unfortunately, in Las Vegas, we had an expert marksman involved in what was going on, and so in addition to being depraved, he was also very good at using his weapons, and that's where this was a problem. But no, there hasn't been an epidemic of bump stock use even before the ban.
And there's still so much we still don't know about that. Isn't it amazing? Yes, it's just a head scratcher. Mark Chenoweth, the New Civil Liberties Alliance. Thank you. Really informative stuff, and we will keep an eye on it. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
That is Cargill v. Garland, and a good job of the New Civil Liberties Alliance for taking that one up, as they often do. 7:15 WMAL traffic and weather every 10 minutes.
WMAL.
Making sense of the news.
Live
from the Home Paramount Pest Control Studios.
Home Paramount, the leader in pest control since 1939.
Later this morning on the Chris Plant Show, the Democrats have gone mainstream with anti-Semitism. Now they're making self-immolation trendy. 9 a.m. on WMAL.
A lot of people analyze the book of Revelation, John's book of Revelation, the final book of the Bible of Holy Scriptures, and they try to read into it because many of the symbols and signs that are written in a, Second Temple era, Jewish apocalyptic type of literature way, these signs are supposed to foretend the end of the world and the second coming of Jesus. And I've heard it said that one of those signs, one of those symbols, is Dr. Phil getting red-pilled. I think it has something to do with the four horsemen or the dragon's tail and the serpent and the, I don't know. I'm not sure. I could be wrong. I may have misinterpreted it. I'm Catholic. But Dr. Phil went on The View yesterday. And, well, here's a little bit.
My understanding is that you went to the southern border. Now, you're saying that you're going to give people facts. What did you take away from that experience, and what kind of reporting are you going to be bringing back from that experience?
I'll tell you a fact I took away. I talked to the head of all the border guards down there, the head of the union. I asked him straight up, kids are coming over the border with numbers written on them, phone numbers and addresses. Do we check those out? He said, well, we call them. Is it possible that we're sending them into known prostitution rings or sweatshops? He said, it's not possible. It is absolute. We are using American tax dollars to ship children into known prostitution and sweatshops.
Some children.
Well, who knows?
Okay.
We don't know. I said, are you?
So what kind of...
I love that that's... Oh, no, hold on.
Yeah,
obviously,
let's
some
not go
children.
crazy.
Wait, do you have any numbers here?
What is wrong with her?
I mean, we sort of take for granted that some children. But, oh, really? You're okay with even some?
Well, she is descended from slave owners.
That's understandable.
Checking do they do? So
They call the number and say, do you know about this child? They say yes. Will you receive them when they come? Yes. I said, is it possible that that's a prostitution ring? He said, we know enough to know that in a number of cases, it has turned out to be absolute sex ring. It has turned out to be an absolute sweatshop. I said, how is this possible?
Well, what do they do?
And he said, it is happening.
What do they do then if they know that that's happening? Where is the U.S. Attorney's Office? Where is the...
Here's the
damn good question.
You have to...
Keep going. Come on, Sonny. You'll get there eventually. You'll get there. She's so close. So here's what's fast. This is why I love it. And good for Dr. Phil. And boy, is he not going to be on Oprah's Christmas list this year if she still celebrates that.
Mad.
Is she doing Christmas, or is she like Bahia now, or whatever the trend is? Everything you just heard, of course, we've been saying for years.
Yes.
We've known this. In fact, if you say it on social media, you're like, how dare you? You'll be deleted and censored because you're saying that child trafficking is going on. Groomers.
Remember when the movie came out and everyone was like, oh,
that's right. Oh, this is a right-wing conspiracy that children are being sexually trafficked. All right, so number one, no one on The View seems to have heard this ever.
Nope.
And number two, they'll only believe it if somebody like Dr. Phil sits there and tells them. And number three, they're not going to believe it even though Dr. Phil
And number
Phil
four,
tells them.
he's never coming back on.
That's right. And he is now canceled. But it didn't stop there. Listen to this.
In like 08, 09, smartphones came on, and kids stopped living their lives and started watching people live their lives. And so we saw the biggest spike and the highest levels of depression.
I love that they're like all into it. Just wait till it turns here. Just wait till it. But right now they're, it's so right, these devices and social media, because this is a thing that moms will get behind and they can jump on and virtue signal and saying it's absolutely right. By the way, don't forget to follow us on TikTok, right before they leave for commercial. But they do. They're like, oh, you're so right. Yes. The kids and the screen time, it's a terrible thing. Now watch how it turns.
Anxiety, loneliness, and suicidality since records have ever been kept. And it's just continued on and on and on. And then COVID hits 10 years later, and the same agencies that knew that are the agencies that shut down the schools for 2 years. Who does that? Who takes away the support system for these children? Who takes them away and shuts it down? And by the way, when they shut it down, they stopped the mandated reporters from being able to see children that were being abused and sexually molested, and in fact sent them home and abandoned them to their abusers with no way to watch. And referrals dropped 50 to 60%. So
there was also a pandemic going on, and they were trying to save
kids' lives. Remember, we know a lot of folks who died during this, so it wasn't, people weren't laying around.
You see where this is headed.
But he said it. Did you hear just then? He said not kids.
Yeah, I know. And now just wait, because Ana Navarro goes full freaking Cuban assassin on him here. Listen.
Children. But, well, you know what? We're lucky. Maybe we're lucky they didn't.
By the way, this is you've got to have Whoopi Goldberg's intellect. The reason kids didn't die from COVID is because we sent them home.
Right, exactly. So they can always turn it.
That's
right. All right. Yes.
But no one has made that case.
Right.
Even Fauci, even
also,
even the CDC.
Many of the kids were staying home, and their parents had to go to work, and were in and out of the house.
And they brought it home.
Yes.
Kids got it.
Yes.
Kids got it. Almost all kids got it. This is Whoopi Goldberg denying the science that if a kid got it, they were relatively
safe. Again, it's 2024. We know what happened.
Well, Whoopi Goldberg doesn't, and neither do the viewers of The View,
Yes.
because they get their news from Whoopi Goldberg. All right, but wait. Oh, it's so good.
As we kept them out of the places that they could be sick, because no one wanted to believe we had an issue.
Are you saying no school children died of COVID?
I'm saying it was the safest group. They were the less vulnerable group, and they suffered and will suffer more from the mismanagement of COVID than they will from the exposure to COVID. And that's not an opinion, that's a fact.
That's right. And listen to the audience.
Even their audience applauding, because it's just freaking common sense,
yes.
and we know it. So there you go.
Everyone
So I
knows
guess the whole point of this segment here is to sort of say a fond farewell to Dr. Phil and his media career that was really powerful and big for a while there.
But such potential.
This is the end. It's over.
I just really quickly, I will say it is amazing to me after how long and what we've seen happen to children that these women remain unmoved by the suffering of these kids, the learning loss, the generational problems we're going to have because of this. They are unmoved.
It is 7:24.
Now
on 105.9 FM and streaming worldwide on the WMAL app.
O'Connor and Company.
7:36, O'Connor and Company here. Thanks for tuning in. Coming up at 8:05, Ron Vitiello running for the Senate in Virginia. And then at 8:35, Byron York, Washington Examiner. It's Larry O'Connor alongside Julie Gunlock.
Good morning.
Good morning, Julie. Joining us right now, Representative Andy Harris of Maryland, representing the entirety of the Republican caucus for that state. Thank you for joining us, Congressman Harris.
Good morning.
Hey, do you think you're going to have some company there? Are you clocking the Maryland 6 race there and all the Republicans who are throwing in for that one?
Yeah, we're watching Maryland 6, and we're also watching that U.S. Senate race now that Larry Hogan's in it.
Yeah, that should be fascinating to watch. I'd love to talk to you right now about where things are going with regard to the budget. You're hearing some voices in the Senate, including Rick Scott and Ron Johnson, hardly the establishment Mitch McConnell types, saying, yeah, we're not going to be doing any omnibus here. We should just do another continuing resolution. I know you hate continuing resolutions, but what are we going to do here?
Well, I don't know. Obviously, the president's going to meet with House and Senate leadership this morning. I hope that Mr. Johnson holds out for some policy wins. And if not, who knows? We'll know by Friday. That's for sure.
Well, and there's also a call right now to sort of put this whole State of the Union show on hold until this gets resolved.
Well, the fact of the matter is that the State of the Union speeches don't mean much anymore. In an election year, it's going to be a political speech. If the president doesn't want to do it, or if the House and Senate leadership we want to delay.
He wants to do it. This is his chance to show everybody that he has cognitive capabilities of being president, right?
Well, he can still read from a teleprompter, and that's all he's going to prove on the State of the Union.
That's fair.
It's a pretty low bar.
Yeah, it is. I don't even know why I ventured there.
We had an interesting moment here. David Trone, Maryland's David Trone, on Biden's age. He said that he wishes Biden was 10 years younger. We don't hear a lot of that talk from Democrats. Do you think we will start to hear more as the election gets closer?
Well, if you were mind readers, we'd hear it from all the Democrats. They all feel that way.
Yeah.
They all know it's a real problem for them. They're trying to figure out how to get around that problem, and it's just not going to work. I mean, obviously, objectively, the president gets worse and worse in his mental status as time goes on. Everybody can see it. He rambles. He shuffles. I mean, everybody sees it.
Does it bother you as a medical professional, as a doctor, that this continues to sort of unfold before our eyes, and there's no one?
The media covers for him.
The media covers for him. His family covers for him. Your colleagues, as you said, they'll say it in their heads, but they're not saying it out loud. And meanwhile, his doctor, the president's physician, all I know is his name, Kevin O'Connor, because we share a last name, only puts out memos every 6 months saying, yeah, he's fine.
Well, again, I think it's pretty clear they haven't done a mental acuity test. Ronnie Jackson and we've called for them for over a year now. The fact of the matter is the American people deserve to know what the mental state of their president is, because, the government can't be run on autopilot by appointees. I mean, the bottom line is, we elect the president. We don't elect we don't elect a cabinet, and the president has to have, all his faculties. That's all I can say.
Well, and you mentioned Ronnie Jackson, your colleague, congressman from Texas. We know his name because he was President Trump's personal physician, or doctor, the president's doctor, I should say, when he was at the White House. And I remember he did like an 1.5 to 2-hour press conference answering any question that anyone in the media had about the president's cognitive abilities.
That's right. The interesting thing is the president likes to go off teleprompter, and he actually says some pretty interesting things. Joe Biden, his staff really fears whenever he goes off teleprompter.
The president, both presidents, Biden and Trump, will be visiting the border on the exact same day. I know that you are greatly concerned about the status of what's going on our southern border, and certainly how it affects our neighborhoods. We're all border states. They're in District 1 of Maryland. You're basically dealing with the same stuff that people in Arizona and New Mexico and Texas have been dealing with. What do you expect to see coming from this border trip?
Well, what you're going to see from Joe Biden is a bizarre attempt to blame Republicans for the problem. Look, one of the best decisions Speaker Johnson ever made was to announce that Senate bill, is dead on arrival, requiring the Senate to dump that, quote, border reform, immigration reform, which it wasn't. It was codifying the Biden policies, which are terrible. So the president's he's full election year mode. He's going to try to blame Republicans for the border crisis, and the average American understands that it's his problem, not the Republicans' problem.
As you saw the murder of this nursing student out of the University of Georgia for someone who should have never been here in the first place, shouldn't have been allowed to stay here in the first place, then, of course, arrested for a pretty serious crime up in New York, not deported after that, stayed on the streets, and then made his way to Georgia to murder this young woman. This is not a one-off. We see a rise in violent crime, and we know that there's no vetting of the people who are coming across the border. It's at what point can this actually reach a tipping point for the American people and for your colleagues in the House, where, how many deaths does it take for this issue to finally get resolved properly?
Well, I think the desperation showed by the Biden team right now is pretty indicative that they realize that the vast majority of Americans understand this can't go on. Even in Athens, Georgia, which is a liberal enclave, the bottom line is there's pushback now against immigration policy because, as the saying goes, a conservative is just a liberal who's been mugged. And the fact of the matter is that, Athens, Georgia just got mugged.
Well, and ICE agents picked up 152 convicted sex offenders for immigration violations in Maryland. That was 2023. It's happening in Maryland, too. It's happening all over this country.
Well, other states have a bigger problem because apparently Maryland is just not a target for a lot of immigrants who cross the border illegally. They don't ask to come here. But the fact of the matter is that, again, around the country, we have problems. And the biggest problem I think we're going to see in Maryland are actually gang issues, because we know that the Venezuelans now come in. The Venezuelan gangs are probably even more ruthless, if that's even possible, than MS-13. And that's what we're going to see over the next few years. And it's all due to Biden's feckless border policy.
Congressman Harris, you mentioned Larry Hogan. And, there are a lot of conservatives, a lot of Republicans who feel like, yes, it was better to have Larry Hogan as governor than the alternative. But during his 8 years, he didn't do enough to really build a Republican Party, to build a deep bench. And he certainly didn't do anything to help Chris Cox after he defeated Kelly Schultz, Hogan's handpicked replacement there in the governor's race. He basically endorsed Wes Moore. Have you heard from Larry Hogan? You could be actually sort of somebody who could motivate the base and get them out there, because I think it's fair to say there are a lot of conservatives and Republicans who don't feel incredibly motivated by Mr. Hogan the way he's conducted himself over the years.
Well, I have. I've had a pretty in-depth discussion with Governor Hogan. I welcome him to the race. I'm 110% behind him. And as I explained to my fellow conservatives, this is your chance in Maryland to have a vote on Chuck Schumer. Normally only New Yorkers get to vote on Chuck Schumer, but this year we get to vote on him because if Larry Hogan gets elected, Chuck Schumer will likely not be the majority leader in the Senate.
So that's it. The bottom line is get him there so that he can give Republicans a majority, and that's basically the best thing he can do at minimum for the next 6 years as our senator.
Well, I think that's the argument you make to those people who were disappointed by his governorship, and it's a very strong argument. The fact of the matter is we know how important that majority in the Senate is in setting up committees and in approving nominees and in appointing Supreme Court justices. The story is that Justice Sotomayor might not be in the best of health. I mean, the possibility exists that the next president could appoint a couple of more Supreme Court justices.
Does he recognize he has some fences to mend there, Larry Hogan?
Absolutely, no question about it. And I think the Maryland Republican Party will actually be better off with him on the ballot, because we're going to discuss the importance of Republicans in national politics and in the Senate versus Democrats, which is always good for the MD GOP.
All right, we'll leave it there. Andy Harris, always a good conversation. You're always pretty frank with us, and we appreciate that. It's sort of a, makes you a unicorn there in Congress. But thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
7:45. Well, the polls have been open for 50 minutes now in Michigan, and have they called it yet for Trump? It's the primary. No, maybe not.
Not yet.
They won't do that. I don't think Nikki Haley has a chance in the Wolverine State today in the Republican primary.
But Larry, she's a woman of her word.
I know. I understand. It'll close at 8 p.m., and then we'll see how the numbers come in. But honestly, a lot of political observers are watching the Democrat race.
Yes.
Because of the radical Islamic terrorists who make up much of the populace in the Democratic Party of the state of Michigan.
Yeah.
There is a move for them to just stay home and not vote, or vote undecided or something like that. I don't know exactly how that registers in the polls necessarily. They're not the smartest group of people. They're led by Rashida Tlaib. What do you want?
Right.
But I keep hearing that they're
Ilmar Ohan.
Well, she's in Minnesota, but
I'm sorry.
It's okay. It's the same thing.
They're the best. They're besties, though. Squad members.
Meanwhile, the buzz around Kristi Noem is getting a little louder. Not only did she win the straw poll, well, she tied with Vivek Ramaswamy at CPAC to be the running mate, and her speech was well received. Yes. She also went and met President Trump at Mar-a-Lago yesterday. So the whispers are sort of catching fire. I expect Donald Trump to make the announcement about VP pretty early, actually, compared to the traditional.
What do you think the chances that it'll be Noem?
The fact that Kristi Noem is the first person that we know of to go down and visit Mar-a-Lago tells me that she doesn't have a chance.
Really?
I always feel like that's sort of an indication that it's like it's all noise and it's all theater. I always feel like the person who actually has the best chance you don't hear about until when the announcement's about to be made.
Have you made a prediction yet who it'll be?
No, I hate making predictions in general, so I don't want to.
Yeah,
don't ask me to.
Okay.
I will tell you this. So now it's interesting because being at CPAC, you have a lot of conversation with so-called insiders, and I said this is maybe the most important vice running mate selection ever in our lifetimes because he's a one-term president.
Right.
So he's automatically picking
That's
the
right.
front runner for 2028. And this insider said that's why some people are advising him to not pick anyone who has future ambitions. It's sort of like the Dick Cheney thing when George. So you could really get somebody who will just be good for the administration and good for the ticket and not be distracted immediately about running for president. Because honestly, they'll be running for president from day one.
Right.
That's not bad advice, actually. And if that's the case, I think you should look at Ben Carson as a possibility. His name was floated around there for a little while. And of all of the potential contenders, he's the one that really doesn't have any ambitions to be the president. What do you think of that?
Interesting.
Again, I'm not making a prediction. I'm just saying based on that. Yeah.
Yeah, that is interesting.
Uh-huh.
And it would be a good.
Is it interesting like when I say something and you say that's
No, this is actually
really interesting,
I
Larry.
hadn't heard that.
It's 7:53.